My name is Mira Langston. I'm 23 years old, and this morning my body hurt so badly I couldn't lift my arms because someone I love canceled my only chance at getting treatment. I got the email from the pharmacy at 6:12 a.m. Order canceled at cardholder's request. The cardholder was my father. When I asked him why, he didn't even look at me, and my mother said, "You always need something. It's enough already." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just whispered, "Noted," and walked out of the room. Before I tell you how a single vial of medication broke my family's mask, let me know where you're watching from today. Tap like, drop a comment, and subscribe if you've ever had to fight for your own survival, especially when the people closest to you pretend you're invisible. I grew up in a quiet, 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood where everyone smiled too much and whispered too loud behind closed doors. From the outside, our family looked picture perfect. My dad, Harlan Langston, was a local banker, always in a pressed shirt, always telling people how proud he was of his family. My mom, Sheila, stayed home mostly, managing the house and posting inspirational quotes on social media about gratitude and family values. Then there was Drew, my younger brother, star quarterback, honor student, the golden child. I used to think the sun rose for him alone, the way my parents treated him. They never missed a single one of his games. They planned vacations around his tournaments. And me? I was the background noise in their highlight reel. At school, I was different. I studied hard, harder than most. I got into the nursing program with scholarships and late nights, battling not only textbooks but a disease that was trying to take me down from the inside out, lupus. Diagnosed at 16, I kept most of it quiet. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was tired of hearing my mom say, "Don't make everything about your illness." I learned to hide the pain, to schedule infusions between exams, and to smile through joint flares. But even silence couldn't win me a place in that house. Last week we had a family dinner, the rare kind where everyone was home. Drew had just been selected to compete in the state championship in Arizona. My dad opened a bottle of wine. My mom made roast chicken and forced everyone to sit at the table without their phones. It looked like a memory from one of those cozy family dramas. But when I mentioned I'd placed an order for a new medication, a biologic I'd been approved for after months of appeal, they all went quiet. "She's always sick," Drew muttered under his breath, not even looking up from his plate. My mother offered a tight smile. "Let's not talk about that now. We're celebrating." So I kept quiet. I always did. Then came the email. 6:12 a.m. My body ached so badly I couldn't even sit up without bracing myself on the nightstand. I opened the message and read the words 3 times. Order canceled at cardholder's request. There was only one card on file, my father's. He'd offered it months ago, saying, "You shouldn't have to choose between tuition and treatment." I believed him. I shouldn't have. Later that morning, I waited until he came into the kitchen. The sun was just rising. He was pouring his first cup of coffee. I asked him gently why the order was canceled. He didn't even blink, just shrugged and said, "There were too many charges coming in." And my mom, standing by the sink, didn't even look up from rinsing strawberries when she added, "You always need something, Mira. It's enough already." I wanted to scream, to ask if they knew what lupus did to a body without proper treatment. But I didn't. I stood there shaking from pain and something deeper, something old and bruised. And I said one word. "Noted." Then I walked upstairs, closed my door, and didn't come out for hours. That morning, I realized something. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they never really saw me. To them, I was a burden wrapped in responsibility, a walking reminder of something they couldn't control, couldn't fix, and didn't want to deal with. So they didn't. But I would. I'd deal with it. Because this time, I wasn't going to disappear quietly. 2 days after the canceled order, I found my parents in the living room, flipping through hotel brochures and flight confirmations. My brother Drew was lounging on the couch, tossing a football up and catching it like the laws of gravity only applied to the rest of us. They were planning their trip to Arizona, his big championship game. I was invisible again. "I thought we weren't doing anything extravagant this month," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Dad looked up with that same tired expression he always wore when I spoke, like I was the 5th email in his inbox that he didn't want to open. "It's a special occasion," he said. You only go to state once, Mom chimed in as she scrolled through her iPad. Besides, it's not like we take trips every year. Except they did. For Drew. Always for Drew. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. My fingers trembled as I opened the pharmacy portal again, hoping it had been a mistake. Maybe a glitch. Maybe a technical error. But there it was. Order canceled. Authorization withdrawn by cardholder. I stared at the words like they were written in fire. I clicked back through my email, trying to find the confirmation number from when I first placed the order. Found it. Clicked again. My heart dropped. The cancellation happened the same day my dad purchased first-class plane tickets to Phoenix. The exact same day my mom booked a 3-night stay at a 5-star resort with a spa package and golf lessons. I checked the credit card statements they'd linked to my profile when they offered to help me manage finances. They probably forgot I still had access. There it was. The hotel, the airfare, the luxury car rental, and no sign of my medication. The next morning, I didn't wait for the right time. I walked straight into the kitchen while Dad was sipping his protein smoothie and Mom was scrolling through Drew's latest Instagram post. I saw the charges, I said. The hotel, the tickets. You used the money meant for my meds. My father didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. I told you, he said. Too many expenses. My mother finally looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, she really saw me. But not with love, with annoyance. Like I was an alarm going off she didn't want to deal with. You always need something, Mira, she said. It's exhausting. This whole sick girl routine. It's getting old. Her words hit harder than the pain ever had. My throat tightened. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I'm not asking for a spa weekend, I said quietly. I'm asking to breathe. I'm asking to walk without collapsing. Mom didn't respond. Dad picked up his smoothie and walked out of the room. Drew never came downstairs. I stood there, heart thudding in my ears, knowing I'd just reached a point of no return. Later that day, I called the pharmacy. The tech on the other end was kind. She confirmed what I already knew, that the card had been declined and authorization revoked by the primary account holder. Is there anyone else we can bill? She asked gently. I wanted to say yes, but there wasn't. Not yet. So I said no, not at the moment. And I hung up. In that moment, something inside me cracked, but not the kind of crack that breaks you. The kind that lets something new come through. They'd chosen to spend thousands on comfort and image. I would choose something else. I would choose truth, even if I had to bleed for it. The next few days felt like walking through water. Heavy, cold, endless. I went to class, I took notes. I nodded when professors called on me, but everything was muted like someone had turned the volume down on the world. Every step I took felt like I was dragging weights. My joints burned, my vision blurred when I stood too fast. But no one noticed. Not my classmates, not my instructors. Certainly not my family. They were too busy texting flight confirmations and packing Drew's lucky socks. I overheard Mom telling a friend on the phone that she was so proud of how far her son had come and how tight-knit the family was. Tight-knit. That was rich. I skipped dinner that night. The idea of sitting at the same table, pretending I was okay while they toasted to Drew's future, made my stomach twist. Instead, I went to my shift at the cafe. It was a quiet place just off campus, the kind of spot with mismatched chairs and faded books lining the windows. I liked it because no one expected me to smile too hard or talk too much. I could just move, make coffee, wipe tables, stack cups, and feel useful, if only for a few hours. That night, my legs started shaking halfway through a simple drink order. By the time I reached the register, my arms had gone numb. I leaned on the counter, trying to hide how badly my body was failing me. A customer asked if I was okay. I nodded, too dizzy to speak. Then everything tilted. The last thing I remember was someone shouting my name and the shatter of a ceramic mug hitting the floor. When I woke up, there were lights above me. Harsh, fluorescent, a ceiling I didn't recognize. The smell hit me first. Antiseptic, the sterile scent of every hospital I'd ever known. Then came the voice. Hey, you're okay. You're safe. It's me. Lynn, my roommate. She was holding my hand, but her face looked like she hadn't slept in days. You had a seizure, she said softly. At work. You collapsed. They called me and I came right away. I tried to speak, but my lips were dry. My body felt like it had been run over and left to bake in the sun. The door opened and a man in scrubs walked in, Mid-40s, glasses, kind eyes. His badge read Dr. Mendez. He smiled gently. "You gave us a bit of a scare, Mira." I tried to sit up. I couldn't. "It looks like you've experienced a neuropsychiatric lupus flare," he said. "Your nervous system's inflamed. We're treating it now, but it's serious." Lynn's voice cracked. "She's been skipping doses. She didn't have the meds." Dr. Mendez turned to her, confused. "Why not?" And before I could stop her, she said it. Her parents canceled the order, without telling her. There was silence in the room, thick and choking. Dr. Mendez nodded slowly, like something heavy had just clicked into place. "That explains a lot." I closed my eyes. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Because part of me still wanted to believe it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew better. They showed up the next morning, dressed like they were going to church. My father in a blue button-down and khakis, clean-shaven like he had a meeting to impress someone. My mother in a pale pink cardigan, pearls around her neck, holding a cup of overpriced coffee like a prop. They didn't look worried. They looked inconvenienced. Dad stood by the foot of the hospital bed, hands in his pockets, glancing occasionally at the machines. Mom sat stiffly in the corner, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone like she had better places to be. "How are you feeling?" he asked, not looking at me. "Alive," I said. "For now." Mom sighed. "Don't be dramatic." I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy to. I had tubes in my arms and pain crawling through every nerve in my body like it had set up permanent residence. What I wanted to ask was why they were there. What I really wanted to ask was why they came at all. Then Lynn walked in. She carried my phone, my charger, and a small bag with toiletries she'd picked up from home. She didn't say anything to them. She didn't have to. The tension in the room thickened. "She's my roommate," I said, my voice raspy. "She's the one who found me." My father nodded, like he was mentally checking that off some invisible list. Mom didn't even acknowledge Lynn. Instead, she turned to me and said, "You really should have told us you were this sick." I laughed. It came out bitter and dry, but I couldn't help it. "I did. You just didn't listen." There was a knock on the door, and Dr. Mendez walked in, holding a clipboard and looking far too awake for someone working an overnight shift. He greeted us, looked at the monitor, then turned to my parents. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "There's something we need to discuss." Mom immediately straightened her shoulders. Dr. Mendez looked at me. I nodded. He continued. "Mira experienced a neuropsychiatric lupus flare. It's a severe complication, often linked to stress or medication disruption. She hasn't had her biologics in weeks." My parents didn't react. Dr. Mendez gave them a beat, then added, "Her pharmacy order was canceled. Our records show it was done by the cardholder. That's one of you?" Dad cleared his throat. "Yes, that was me. There were some budgeting concerns." Dr. Mendez tilted his head. "Budgeting, I see. Well, withholding necessary treatment for a chronic condition is dangerous, potentially fatal." My mother's voice was tight. "We're not doctors. How were we supposed to know?" "You weren't," Dr. Mendez said calmly. "But you were told. Mira shared her diagnosis. She trusted you." The silence that followed felt louder than any alarm. Lynn stepped forward. "She told you. She asked for help. You chose not to listen." I closed my eyes. Not because I was tired, but because I couldn't bear to look at them. Not now. Not like this. "Doctor," Mendez continued, "I'll be filing a report with the hospital's patient advocacy team. There may be legal implications depending on her next steps." Mom's lips parted, shocked. "You're blaming us?" "No," he said. "I'm stating facts." My father stared at the floor. I stared at the ceiling. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because something had shifted. I wasn't begging anymore. The next morning, I woke up to quiet. No machines beeping, no doctors coming in and out, no voices arguing over who was responsible for what. Just sunlight through the blinds and the soft hum of air conditioning. Lynn was asleep in the chair beside me, her head tilted awkwardly, a hoodie bundled beneath her neck. She'd been with me every day since I was admitted, never once asked for anything, never once tried to explain my pain away. When I shifted slightly in the bed, she stirred. "Hey," she said softly, blinking the sleep from her eyes. "You're awake." "Barely," I croaked, my voice still rough from dehydration and medication. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How are you feeling?" I paused before answering. "I don't know. Different." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The kind of silence you don't rush. The kind that lets you breathe after holding your chest tight for too long. Then Lynn reached into her backpack and pulled out a printed folder. The cover said, "Patient Rights and Legal Support, Medical Neglect Cases." "I didn't want to overwhelm you," she said, "but Dr. Mendez thought you should have this." I stared at it. At first I felt nothing, just exhaustion. Then I felt anger, not rage, not screaming, table-flipping anger. No, this was colder, calmer, focused. It was the kind of anger that made you sharpen your edges and steady your hands. "They chose," I whispered. "They looked at me, looked at Drew's game, and they made a decision." Lynn didn't interrupt. "They chose comfort. They chose appearances. They chose... not me." I looked up at her, eyes burning. "So now I choose." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "What do you want to do?" There was a long silence. Then I said it. "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Ever again." Her eyes widened, but not with surprise. With relief. She saw it. That something inside me had changed. Later that day, Dr. Mendez came back. He brought someone with him, a woman in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a blazer too sharp for a hospital hallway. "This is Audra Gray," he said. "She's a civil rights attorney, specializes in medical neglect and patient advocacy. She's helped a lot of people in your situation." Audra smiled gently. "Only if you want help. This is your call, Mira. Every step." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice. I looked at Lynn, then at Audra. "I'm done being quiet," I said. No one said anything for a moment. Then Audra opened her folder and said, "Then let's begin." By the end of that afternoon, we had started gathering paperwork, pharmacy records, email confirmations, text messages, medical history. I told Audra everything. About the canceled order, the flight bookings, the spa package, the hospital visit, the years of being told to tone it down, to not ruin the mood, to wait until after Drew's season was over. And she listened. Really listened. The way my own mother never had. When she left that evening, she squeezed my hand and said, "They underestimated you." And maybe for the first time, I believed that was a good thing. Because now I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for war. Over the next few days, my hospital room turned into a war room. Lynn brought in her laptop. Audra brought in a printer. Dr. Mendez faxed over copies of my medical history and treatment notes. And I brought the memories, the ones I'd spent years trying to forget. We started with the pharmacy. Audra pulled up the email I'd received from them, the one that confirmed the order had been canceled by the cardholder. Then we contacted the pharmacy directly. The customer service rep was cautious at first, but Audra knew what to say, what words triggered legal protocol, and within minutes, we had a detailed log. Order placed. Insurance verified. Payment pending. Canceled by cardholder. Timestamped. Documented. Undeniable. "That's one piece," Audra said, slipping the printed record into a thick folder labeled Langston Private. Next was the payment trail. I'd almost forgotten that my dad had added me as a secondary user on the family's shared credit dashboard, back when he still pretended to care. I logged in. The interface was familiar, like visiting a childhood bedroom where the furniture had been rearranged. We found it. Airfare. 2 first-class tickets to Phoenix. Hotel reservation at a 5-star golf resort, spa treatments, room service, champagne, all booked the same day the medication order was canceled. Audra just nodded. That's pattern and intent. Then came the harder part, the memories. Lynn and I sat in silence for a while before I began. "There was this one night," I said. "Junior year. I was having a flare, really bad. I could barely walk from my room to the bathroom. My hands were shaking. I asked my mom if we could go to urgent care just for fluids, maybe a steroid shot." "What did she say?" Audra asked. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said, "Not tonight. Drew has a swim meet in the morning. He needs his rest." Audra scribbled something down. "How many times did that happen?" "More than I can count." I showed her texts from those nights, short, desperate messages I'd sent to my parents. "Please help me. I think it's getting worse. I'm scared." No replies, but screenshots speak louder than silence. Lynn looked up from her notes. Remember Christmas last year? When you had that infection from the IV site? I nodded. She made you wear long sleeves so the family wouldn't ask questions. She said it would ruin the vibe, I whispered. Audra didn't say a word. She just added it all to the file. One by one, we stacked the story back together. Every time I was told to stay quiet, to wait, to not ruin things for Drew. Every time my illness became an inconvenience to manage rather than a reality to confront. Dr. Mendez dropped in later that afternoon. He brought a typed summary of my flare history with his signature at the bottom and a line that read, "This patient's health has been significantly compromised due to delayed or denied treatment." I stared at the paper. It was so official, so black and white. And for a moment, I felt like I was looking at my life through someone else's eyes. Not the girl who kept her head down and tried to be easy to love, but a person who'd been failed, over and over. Audra saw me staring. "This is your story," she said gently. "They've tried to bury it for years. Now it's time we dig it up and show the world what they chose to ignore." I didn't cry. Not that day. Instead, I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and typed 4 words into a blank document. Pain is not selfish. There's something strange about memory. When you try to suppress it, it lingers, lurks, waits. But the second you decide to let it out, to say it out loud, it comes flooding back with colors sharper than you remember, sounds louder than you'd expect, and feelings you thought you'd buried long ago. That's what happened when Audra asked me to write everything down. Not for court, not for an article, just for me. "Get it all out," she said. "We'll shape the legal part later. But right now, I need you to remember. Not as a lawyer, but as someone who believes you." So I opened my laptop again. The same one I used to take notes in nursing school. The same one I used to order my medication. The same one I once cried over when the pain got too loud to type. And I wrote. I wrote about being 13 and missing 3 weeks of school because of a flare. I wrote about the time I bled through my sheets at 16 because my immune system decided to attack itself in a new, horrifying way, and how my mom told me not to make a scene when I asked to go to the ER during Christmas dinner. I wrote about junior prom, when I had to wear flats because my ankles were too swollen for heels. I wrote how I spent that entire night smiling for photos with friends while quietly counting the minutes until I could take my meds in the bathroom stall. I wrote about my date asking why I looked tired in every picture. I wrote about the day Drew crashed Dad's car and everyone rushed to comfort him, even as I sat in the kitchen with a fever of 102, too weak to even ask for water. That night, I crawled to the fridge on my hands and knees while my family laughed in the living room about how boys will be boys. It all poured out, like someone had finally opened the valve. When I finished, I had over 30 pages. I handed it to Audra the next day. She didn't speak while reading, just flipped slowly, page by page, occasionally underlining a word or writing a note in the margin. When she was done, she looked at me and said, "This isn't just testimony, it's a timeline of systemic neglect. You've built a case, Mira, whether you meant to or not." Lynn walked in with coffee. She sat next to me and glanced at the stack of pages. "Let me guess," she said. "The chapters of hell?" I laughed, the first real laugh in days. "More like the things I wasn't allowed to say out loud." Lynn put her hand on mine. "Well, say them now, as loud as you can." That night, I opened a new document and started writing again. This time not for Audra, not for the court, for the world. I titled it, "Pain is Not Selfish." I didn't hold back. I talked about the physical symptoms, yes, but also the emotional isolation, the mental math of deciding whether to ask for help or stay quiet to avoid being too much. I wrote about the gaslighting, the guilt, the way my family weaponized silence and used Drew's achievements as a shield against accountability. And at the end, I wrote, "If you've ever been told that your pain is inconvenient, if you've ever had to swallow your suffering to protect someone else's comfort, you are not alone, and you are not selfish." I hit post. Then I closed the laptop and waited. I didn't expect anything, really. Maybe a few likes from classmates, maybe silence. But by morning, the post had exploded. Hundreds of comments, thousands of shares, messages from people across the country, nurses, patients, daughters, sons, who had stories that sounded like mine. People who said, "This is my life too." People who said, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." And just like that, my pain became something else. It became a voice. The more I spoke, the more I remembered. Memory's funny like that. You think you've buried something for good, only to have it claw its way back the second the silence breaks. After the post went viral, I received an email from a podcast producer. She ran a well-known medical justice show and she wanted me to speak, not just about the pharmacy order, about all of it. At first I hesitated. It felt too big, too raw, too personal. But Lynn looked me in the eye and said, "You've already lived it. Telling it won't kill you. Staying silent nearly did." So I said yes. The night before the recording I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because my brain wouldn't stop showing me scenes I didn't even know I remembered. Like the time I was 9 and I had strep so bad I couldn't speak. I stayed home from school, curled up in the living room under a blanket, barely able to swallow. My mom brought me toast, dropped it on a plate, and said, "Don't breathe on anything. Drew's spelling bee is next week." Or the time I was 15, when I was supposed to have a follow-up appointment with a rheumatologist, and my dad canceled it because he didn't want to miss Drew's regional football tryouts. I hadn't thought about that in years. But now it hit like a freight train. They didn't forget. They prioritized. The morning of the interview, I sat in front of a microphone with the producer on Zoom and the host in my headphones. Her voice was warm, grounding. "We're here today with Mira Langston," she began, "a nursing student who's been living with lupus since she was 16 and whose recent experience has sparked a national conversation." I swallowed hard. Then I spoke. I told them about the canceled medication, about the trip to Arizona, about collapsing at work. But I also told them what no paperwork could capture. I told them what it feels like to be the child who gets the leftovers of love, the one who doesn't get picked, the one whose pain is always scheduled around someone else's spotlight. I said, "People think medical neglect is about not getting prescriptions, but sometimes it's about not being believed, about being treated like your body's betrayal is your own fault, about being punished for needing care." There was a pause on the other end. Then the host said, "Mira, I think a lot of people just felt seen for the first time." When the episode aired, the response was overwhelming. Comments, emails, a handwritten letter from a woman in Ohio who had been kicked out of her parents' house at 22 after getting diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And then came something I didn't expect. A message from my high school biology teacher. "Hi Mira, I heard your story. I want you to know, back when you used to fall asleep in the back row, I didn't think you were lazy. I was worried. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I see it now." I sat with that message for a long time, because part of me always wondered if anyone had noticed. Turns out some people did. They just didn't know what to do with the noticing. Audra called the next day. She had been watching everything unfold. "I hope you're ready," she said. "We're about to shift from awareness to action. I filed the preliminary motion. The hearing will happen sooner than expected." I took a breath. "Do you think I'll win?" Audra paused, then said, "You already are." The post started as a journal entry. It wasn't polished. It wasn't strategic. It was raw and unfiltered. Just me, my thoughts, and a worn-out keyboard. I had written pieces of it in my head for years, on long bus rides, in waiting rooms, while lying awake at 3 a.m. with pain ricocheting through my spine. Every word was a quiet scream I'd never let out, until now. I titled it, "Pain is Not Selfish." I wrote, "They told me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too complicated, but what they really meant was, you are too inconvenient for the fantasy we've created about ourselves." I talked about what it's like to ask for help and be met with silence, to sit at the dinner table while people talked over you, around you, never to you. To be treated as a project, never a person. I described the cost of staying quiet, not just in medical terms, but in emotional ones. The loneliness, the self-doubt, the shame that blooms when the people you love most look at your suffering and say, "You're exaggerating." And then I ended it like this. If you've ever been made to feel like your illness is an inconvenience, if your pain was met with eye rolls instead of care, if your fight for survival was labeled as drama, this post is for you. Pain is not selfish. Needing help is not a moral failure. You deserve to be seen. I hit publish. Then I closed the laptop and went for a walk. It was early evening. The sun was low, the sky turning a kind of bruised purple. I walked past the cafe where I collapsed, past the bus stop where I once sat for 40 minutes with a fever, too afraid to call home, past the clinic where I'd begged for free samples because I couldn't afford my meds that month. By the time I got back to the apartment, Lynn was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. "You need to see this," she said. The post had gone viral. Within hours, it had racked up over 50,000 shares. The comment section had turned into a digital support group. People from every corner of the country, some from other parts of the world, were sharing their stories. A woman in Seattle wrote, "I was told I was lazy for needing naps. Turns out I had lupus too." A man in Florida commented, "My brother told me to stop faking seizures. I was later diagnosed with epilepsy." Teenagers, grandparents, veterans, nurses, single moms, people who'd stayed quiet for years finally had somewhere to speak. I scrolled through the messages with tears in my eyes, not just for me, but for all of them. The invisible army I never knew I was part of. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls and 7 media requests. One was from a podcast I'd never heard of, but apparently it had over 1 million listeners. Another was from a chronic illness nonprofit that wanted to print my piece as part of a national awareness campaign. I read every word twice, then forwarded them all to Audra. She called me a few minutes later. "Congratulations," she said. "You've just become a witness and a catalyst." I laughed. "I didn't mean to start a movement." "You didn't mean to survive either," she said. "But you did." That afternoon, I sat at my desk and printed out the post. I wanted to hold it in my hands, to feel the weight of it, to remind myself that these weren't just words. They were proof. They were power. I slid the paper into a folder labeled "The Vile Trust." At that point, it was just a phrase. But soon, it would be so much more. By the end of the week, I'd spoken on 2 podcasts, 1 local news segment, and a live Zoom panel with 3 other women living with autoimmune diseases. Each time I told my story, it got a little easier. Not because the pain faded, it didn't, but because the shame started to lift. The guilt I'd carried for years, as if my body's breakdowns were somehow a character flaw, began to peel away like old wallpaper. People were listening. But more importantly, people were responding. I wasn't just being heard, I was being believed. One afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Tessa who ran a grassroots advocacy group called Dignity First. She'd read Pain is Not Selfish and wanted to collaborate. They were preparing a nationwide campaign focused on medical neglect in underserved families, and she thought my story could be the spark. "You're not just the face of this, Mira," she said. "You're the heartbeat." I thanked her. Then I hung up and sat with those words for a while. The heartbeat. No one in my family had ever described me as anything more than fragile, needy, expensive. Now strangers were calling me powerful. And then came the shift. It started quietly. A message request from a high school acquaintance I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, was that about your parents?" I recognized your mom in one of the comments, then another. "I know Drew. We played club ball together. He always talked about how his sister was dramatic about her health." I had no idea. Then came the articles. First a health blog, then a mid-tier investigative site picked it up. By the time Health Watch Today ran a headline, "Student denied treatment by family, lupus survivor speaks out," it was official. My name was out there. So was theirs. I didn't name them directly, but people connected dots faster than I expected. Within hours, Drew's team sponsors were being tagged on social media. People flooded the school's athletics page demanding they issue a statement. My parents' community group, the same one where my mom once gave lectures on positive parenting, started fielding questions. One of the comments read, "Funny how she forgot to mention her daughter's hospitalization during that wellness talk last fall." Then came the email from the Arizona Championship Committee. A short, sterile message stating that, "Due to concerns raised by the media and public outcry, we are reviewing all affiliations and sponsorship relationships related to Mr. Drew Langston." Lynn looked at me from across the table. "They're feeling it now." I nodded, but I didn't smile. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about exposure. For years, they built this house of cards, of image, of perfection, of Sunday smiles and holiday photos with carefully edited captions. Now, the wind was picking up. Audra warned me that the media attention would escalate fast. She wasn't wrong. We started getting calls from major networks. One of them offered to fly me out for an in-studio interview. I declined. I wasn't ready for lights and cameras. I was still building something quieter, something longer lasting. The folder on my desk had grown thicker. Inside were letters from people I didn't know, handwritten notes on lined paper, sometimes just 1 or 2 sentences long. "Thank you. I thought I was the only one. I haven't spoken to my sister in 12 years. Now I know why." I wish my daughter had lived long enough to find your words. Each one reminded me that this wasn't just a story. It was a mirror. And when enough people hold up a mirror, the truth has nowhere to hide. That night, I got a text from my father. Just 5 words. We need to talk, please. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off my phone and went back to writing. Because this time, my voice wasn't just mine. It belonged to every person who'd ever been told their suffering was a stain on the family portrait. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. I remember thinking that as I stood just outside the courtroom doors, clutching a folder full of documentation that felt heavier than it should have. Lynn squeezed my shoulder gently. You ready? No, I said, but I'm going in anyway. The room was quiet when we entered, not empty, just still, like everyone was waiting for the first breath to break the silence. I saw them immediately, my parents. Harlan sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his jaw locked tight. Sheila looked smaller than usual, her shoulders hunched, her hair pulled back too tightly as if to hold herself together. Neither of them looked at me. Across from them sat Audra, calm as ever, flipping through her notes with surgical precision. She didn't need to posture. The facts were loud enough. When the judge entered, we all stood. He was older, soft-spoken, but his eyes were sharp. No one spoke out of turn. This wasn't a criminal trial, it was a civil hearing, but the tension in the room could have cut steel. Audra started with the basics. Medical history, timeline of diagnosis, proof of canceled treatment, printouts from the pharmacy, emails, bank statements. It was all laid out, quiet and devastating. Then she called me to the stand. My knees felt like water, but I stood, raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. And then I did. I told the court what it felt like to be sick and invisible, what it meant to beg for help and be met with irritation. I described the morning I got the cancellation email, the plane tickets, the hotel receipts. My voice didn't shake, not once. The judge asked one question. Miss Langston, what are you hoping to accomplish with this action? I looked at him and said, to make sure no one else has to beg their parents for the right to stay alive. Silence. Then Audra called Lynn. She sat confidently, hands folded, voice steady. I found her on the floor, she said, convulsing. I thought she was dying. I asked her parents what happened. They blamed me. They didn't even ask how she was until the doctor mentioned a formal report. The judge raised an eyebrow. They accused you of neglect? Lynn nodded. I lived with Mira for 2 years. I know how she takes care of herself. I know how hard she tried not to be a burden. But the truth is, they were supposed to be the ones protecting her. Then Dr. Mendez took the stand. He didn't need theatrics. His words were clinical, factual, and cold. Delaying lupus treatment can result in irreversible damage, organ failure, neurological decline. Mira Langston was on the edge of both. He glanced briefly at my parents. There is no medical excuse for what happened, only neglect. Finally, Harlan and Sheila were given a chance to speak. My father stood, adjusted his jacket, and said, We were under financial pressure. We didn't understand the severity. The judge raised a brow. You're a banker, Mr. Langston. And you purchased a $4,000 resort package the same week you canceled your daughter's medication. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at me, finally. And all I saw was fear. Not regret. Not love. Fear of being seen for who she really was. The judge sat back, removed his glasses, and exhaled slowly. I don't believe this was a misunderstanding, he said. This was a deliberate failure of responsibility, not just ethical, but legal. His gavel struck the wood. Motion approved. Damages to be paid, medical protections enforced, immediate no-contact order granted. It was over. But something else had begun. When I stepped out into the hallway, Lynn waiting with teary eyes and Audra beside her with that familiar steel in her spine, I felt it. Not victory, not vindication. Something deeper, like I had finally stood up inside my own skin. After the ruling, I thought things would go quiet. They didn't. If anything, the silence I'd lived with for years had been replaced by an echo, something louder, heavier, impossible to ignore. It wasn't coming from me anymore. It was coming from the world. 3 days after the hearing, Dr. Mendez called me into his office at the hospital. I thought it was just a follow-up, a routine check-in. It wasn't. He sat across from me, a large manila folder on his desk. his hands folded with the kind of stillness that only comes after years of watching people break and mend again. "Mira," he said gently, "I need you to know something. After your case, the hospital launched a formal internal review." I blinked. Of what? Medical guardianship protocols, parental interference, delayed care patterns. We went back and looked at every minor and dependent adult case flagged over the past 5 years. He paused. And we found more. The folder in front of him wasn't mine. It was a list, a long one. "People like you," he continued. "Kids and young adults with chronic illness whose care was delayed, sabotaged, or deprioritized by their legal guardians. Most of them were afraid to speak. Some didn't survive long enough to." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. He slid the folder toward me. "And now, we're not letting that happen again." The hospital board had approved a new initiative, a task force, a mandatory training for all staff on how to identify patterns of non-medical interference in treatment. They were calling it the Langston Protocol. I stared at the name. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like something heavier, something holy, like a warning etched into marble so others wouldn't fall through the same cracks. Later that week, Audra forwarded me an email from the county district attorney's office. Apparently, they'd been watching the civil proceedings closely. The judge's ruling had opened a path to criminal investigation. "We're not talking prison bars," Audra said when we met in her office, "but we're talking charges, felony-level neglect, fraud, endangerment." My parents had no idea what was coming. Neither did Drew. I hadn't heard from him since the verdict. He'd gone radio silent, even scrubbed his social media clean. No more selfies in uniforms, no more victory hashtags, just a black profile photo and an empty bio. Rumor had it his scholarship was on pause. Sponsors had pulled out. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like someone had opened a window in a house that had smelled like mold for years. The air didn't fix everything, but it let me breathe. That weekend, Dr. Mendez invited me to speak at a medical ethics panel. It was small, mostly residents and fellows, but he insisted my voice mattered. "You're not just a story, Mira," he said. "You're a shift." So I stood in front of a half circle of people in scrubs and lab coats and told them what it was like to be medically gaslit by the people who signed your consent forms. I told them what it meant to have pain dismissed not by strangers, but by those who claim to love you most. I ended with this. Not all harm leaves bruises. Some of it hides in charts, in missed appointments, in the silence between questions doctors never ask, but it's harm all the same. When I stepped down, they clapped. Not politely, but with urgency. And I knew then, we weren't going back. If I was the match, Lynn was the fire that kept it burning. After the ethics panel and the first wave of media attention, the court reached out again. This time, not for me, but for Lynn. She was subpoenaed to provide formal testimony as a third-party witness in the upcoming review led by the district attorney's office. It wasn't a trial yet, but it was close. The morning she was scheduled to speak, we sat across from each other in our tiny kitchen. She was holding a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her fingers were trembling, but her face was calm. "You don't have to do this," I said softly. She looked up, and for the first time in a long time I saw anger behind her eyes. "I do," she replied, "because I watched you shrink for 2 years in that apartment. I watched them erase you one quiet moment at a time, and no one ever said anything. Not your school, not the system, not even me. I let it happen." I opened my mouth to protest, but she raised her hand. "This is me taking some of that back." In court, she was a force. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She told the story in clean lines, stripped of drama but rich with truth. She talked about the day she came home and found me collapsed near the bathroom. How I was still holding my phone in my hand, trying to call for help. She talked about how many times I whispered apologies for taking up space, for needing ice packs, for asking her to pick up prescriptions when I couldn't move. And she talked about my parents, how they arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, not in a panic, not in grief, but in pressed clothes and cold expressions. They walked in like it was a board meeting, she said, like Mira was an inconvenience they had to sign paperwork for. The assistant DA leaned forward. "Miss Halloran, in your view, did the Langstons demonstrate any concern for their daughter's well-being during her hospitalization?" Lynn didn't hesitate. "No, they demonstrated concern for optics. That's not the same thing." There was a rustle of murmurs in the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel once, more for punctuation than order. When they showed Lynn the pharmacy record, the order placed and then cancelled by Harlan Langston, she stared at it a long time before responding. "She showed me that email when it came in," she said quietly. I didn't know what to say. I just remember thinking, who does that to their own child? The DA nodded. Then came the final question. "If you could say one thing to the Langston family now, what would it be?" Lynn didn't blink. "I thought you were just cold people, distant, busy. But you weren't. You were strategic. You managed your daughter's suffering like a PR risk, and now the world sees it for what it is." When she stepped down, I stood and hugged her. Not because I needed comfort, but because I wanted her to know I saw her too. And I think everyone else did that day. Later, as we waited for the elevator, she looked at me and smiled. "I used to think being a good friend meant staying out of the way." I tilted my head. "And now?" She took a breath. "Now I think it means standing right in front of the fire and saying, you don't get to burn her, not today." Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in letters, in foreclosure notices taped to a front door. I didn't go looking for news about my family after the ruling. I didn't need to. It found me. 2 weeks after the court's decision, a local newspaper ran a story. Community leader and banking exec face civil penalty for medical negligence. There was a photo, cropped tight, almost grainy, of my parents leaving the courthouse. No smiles, no masks. The article mentioned the fine, $185,000. It mentioned the no-contact order. And it mentioned me, though briefly and without my quote. That was intentional. Audra had advised it. I wasn't interested in being a symbol. I was still learning how to be a survivor. But the story rippled fast. Harlan's bank put him on indefinite leave. Sheila's volunteer organization quietly removed her from the advisory board. Their house, the one I'd grown up in, the one with the white shutters and the perfectly trimmed hedges, went on the market within a month. Rumor had it they couldn't keep up with the legal costs. I didn't rejoice. I didn't even feel vindicated. I felt numb, like I was watching strangers drown in a storm they built themselves. Lynn and I sat on the couch one evening, watching the coverage on mute while eating frozen pizza. "You okay?" she asked. I shrugged. "I don't know how to feel," I said. "It's not like I wanted this, I just wanted it to stop." She nodded slowly. "And now it has. But stopping pain doesn't always feel like peace." I stared at the screen, at the scrolling headlines, at the way their names were being picked apart the way mine had been for years. The next day I got a message from a reporter, one of the bigger outlets. "We'd love to do an in-depth feature. Your voice could help so many others." I read the message 3 times, then closed my inbox. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed space to breathe. Truth has a strange gravity to it. Once it's out in the open, it drags everything with it. Memories, people, consequences. You don't get to control the fallout, only how you stand in it. Drew was the last domino to fall. His scholarship was officially suspended. His name disappeared from the university roster. A quiet press release followed. Program reevaluating student eligibility in light of new information. He never called, never wrote. But one night I opened my phone and saw a photo. Someone had tagged me anonymously. It was a snapshot of Drew sitting alone in an empty gym, hoodie up, head down. The caption read, "Heroes fade fast when the truth shows up." I didn't repost it. I didn't even like it. Because as much as Drew benefited from the lie, he wasn't the architect. He was a mirror, just like I had been. Raised in the same house? Taught the same story? The only difference? I broke the silence. It started with a box, not a grand office or a big announcement, just a cardboard box I pulled from the back of my closet. Inside were years of paperwork, medical records, denied claims, handwritten notes from doctors, and a dozen folders labeled in my shaky handwriting. Flare-ups, specialists, appeals, bills. I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through it all. My whole illness had been documented in fragments, scattered across years like a story no one wanted to finish reading. But now, I wasn't just reading it. I was rewriting it. That same night, I reopened the folder I'd labeled The Vile Trust. It had started as a name, a thought, a way to remind myself that my voice and that one canceled vial mattered. Now it was going to be real. Lynn helped me draft the mission statement. We spent an entire weekend surrounded by sticky notes, takeout containers, and the soft buzz of a shared purpose. The Vile Trust, a nonprofit initiative dedicated to supporting individuals with autoimmune disorders who face familial or systemic barriers to accessing care. We wanted it to do three things: provide emergency funding for medications, connect patients with advocacy resources, and offer community education on medical neglect. Simple, focused, personal. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about the girl who messaged me last week saying she'd been rationing her biologics to make rent. About the single dad in Michigan who was fighting for custody because his ex had stopped their daughter's epilepsy treatment out of spiritual preference. About the teenager whose parents refused to believe he had Crohn's because boys don't get sick like that. These stories kept coming, and I couldn't unhear them, so we filed the paperwork. We built a website. Dr. Mendez signed on as medical advisor. Audra agreed to sit on the board. We applied for grants, made a small promotional video, and asked for volunteers. To my surprise, people showed up. People donated. People believed. Within the first 2 months, we funded medication for 17 patients, some as young as 8. We partnered with 3 clinics to offer screenings and referrals. A local news station did a quiet piece, just 5 minutes, but the phone started ringing right after. One morning, I walked into our tiny shared office, a converted room in a community center, and found a man waiting by the door. He looked nervous, clutching a folder to his chest like it might blow away. "I don't have an appointment," he said. I read your article. My sister is sick, and we don't know where to start." I smiled. "You just did." That afternoon, I stayed late, organizing files, answering emails, trying to keep up with everything. As I packed up, Lynn came in holding an envelope. "You got something," she said. "It was a check, a donation, no name, just a short note, for every time someone told you no when they should have said yes." "Keep going." I didn't cry. But I sat there a long time, holding that slip of paper like it was something sacred. Because maybe it was. Maybe this is how the world begins to change. Not with noise, not with fury, but with one small, stubborn act of defiance that says, "I'm still here. And now I'm bringing others with me." The first time I wore my nurse's scrubs to work at the community clinic, I stood in front of the mirror for almost 5 minutes before stepping out the door. It wasn't the uniform. It was what it meant. That I had made it through. That I wasn't just the patient anymore. The clinic sat on the corner of a tired block in Southridge, tucked between a laundromat and an old church that held AA meetings twice a week. The paint on the front door was peeling. The waiting room chairs didn't match. The budget was thin. But the people were everything: immigrants, seniors, veterans, single moms, kids with chronic coughs and tired eyes. They came through those doors because they didn't have anywhere else to go, and now neither did I. But that wasn't a loss. It was a homecoming. Dr. Morales, the clinic's director, greeted me on my first day with a warm handshake and a stack of intake forms. "We don't save lives in here," she said. "We listen. That's where the healing starts." And so I listened. To stories about missed prescriptions and untreated pain, about hospitals that turned people away, about fear, quiet and constant, like background noise people had learned to live with. One patient in particular stayed with me. Her name was Nadia. She was 10 years old and barely weighed 70 pounds. Her mom brought her in complaining of joint pain and constant fatigue. She'd missed school more days than she'd attended. As I checked her vitals, I noticed the way she flinched when I touched her wrists, soft like a shadow pulling away from light. "Does it hurt here?" I asked. She nodded. Her mom looked away, eyes glossy with guilt. "We thought it was growing pains. Or maybe..." She was being dramatic. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat down beside her, held her hand gently and said, "You're not crazy. Your body is just asking for help, and we're going to listen to it now." Nadia didn't cry. She just stared at me with the kind of fierce, fragile hope I remembered seeing in the mirror once. The kind that asks, "Is it really safe to believe this time?" After they left, I sat at my desk and wrote a referral to a pediatric rheumatologist. I flagged her chart for follow-up. I called in a sample prescription to help her get through the next few days, and then I put my head down and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood why I'd survived. Not for justice, not even for healing, but for this, for the little girl with bones that ache and a voice too small to carry her pain alone, For every patient who thinks they're the problem because someone told them their illness was too inconvenient to care about. I wiped my face, stood up, and went back to work. That night, I stayed late. The clinic was quiet. Just the hum of old lights and the distant sounds of someone vacuuming down the hall. I was logging notes when Dr. Morales poked her head in. "You're still here?" I smiled. "Charting. We had a full schedule today." She stepped inside and handed me a small white envelope. "What's this?" "Mail came for you." Inside was a letter, handwritten, careful cursive, no return address. It read, "You don't know me, but I've been following your work. I saw what you did, for your story, for yourself, for others. My daughter would have been about your age now. She had lupus too. She didn't make it. But if she had, I hope she would have found someone like you. Thank you, Mira." I held the paper against my chest, and for the first time in a very long time I let myself feel proud. Not loud public pride, quiet pride. The kind you earn when no one is watching. The kind that says, you didn't just survive, you became someone worth surviving for. The letter came in a plain envelope, no return address, no markings. Just my name, written in my mother's familiar cursive. Mira, no sweetheart, no baby girl, just my name, the way strangers write it. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at it for a long time. I didn't open it right away. For once, there was no urgency, no obligation to respond. It was the first time in my life where her voice would enter my space only if I chose to let it. Eventually, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. "Mira, I've started this letter 100 times. Each one sounded like an excuse, so I threw them away. This one is different. This one is just the truth. I failed you. I thought if I kept everything orderly, if Drew succeeded, if our family looked strong, then somehow your pain would shrink. That if I didn't talk about it, it wouldn't grow. But it did. And so did your silence. I watched it fill the room every time you walked in. And I let it. I didn't know how to mother a child I couldn't fix. So I ignored the parts of you I didn't understand. I thought love meant protecting you from weakness, but all I did was abandon you in it. I was wrong. I know this letter doesn't erase the years, or the missed birthdays, or the canceled prescriptions, but I hope it says one thing clearly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not seeing you. I'm sorry for not choosing you. You were always worth choosing. Mom. I read it once, then again, and again, not searching for something new, just letting the words land, noticing which ones burned and which ones didn't. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo anything. But it was the first time I saw her write something without trying to rewrite the story. I didn't cry. I didn't tear it up either. I folded the letter back up and placed it in a small wooden box I kept under my nightstand. Inside were a few photos, a bracelet from college, and an old birthday card from Lynn. I closed the lid gently. Not to forget, not to bury, but to keep it exactly where it belonged, contained but not erased. Later that night, Lynn saw me sitting by the window. "Everything okay?" I nodded. She wrote me. Lynn didn't ask what it said. She just sat beside me, silent, warm. "What are you going to do?" she asked after a while. I looked out at the stars, tiny and distant. "I think I'll forgive her," I said. "But I won't go back." Because forgiveness doesn't mean return. It means release. I used to think survival meant staying quiet, enduring, swallowing the pain so it didn't make anyone else uncomfortable. But I was wrong. Survival is loud. It's the voice you use when your body breaks down and no one's watching. It's the way you show up anyway. It's the decision every single day to choose yourself, even when no one else will. Last week, I stood in front of a group of nursing students, giving a guest lecture on patient advocacy. Half of them had never heard of medical gaslighting. Most didn't know how often chronic illness is dismissed in women, especially young women. I told them my story, not as a victim, but as proof that silence can kill, and that one vial of canceled medication can shatter an entire family's illusion of love. After the talk, one of the students came up to me. She couldn't have been more than 21. Soft voice, nervous hands. "My mom has lupus," she said. "She stopped taking her meds because my dad said it was too expensive. She doesn't think it's worth fighting about anymore." I looked her in the eye and said, "Tell her it's not about the money. It's about her life, and she's allowed to want more of it." She nodded, eyes filled with something I recognized, fear and fire tangled together. When she left, I sat alone for a moment, letting the stillness settle in my chest. I thought about all the people who'd watched me fall and stayed silent, and all the people who'd watched me rise and stood with me. I thought about Lynn, Dr. Mendez, Audra, Nadia, the little girl with aching joints and sharp questions, and I thought about my younger self, curled up on a twin mattress, holding a heating pad against her ribs, wondering if it was her fault she always felt so tired. I wish I could go back and hold her hand, tell her she was never hard to love, only hard for the wrong people to understand. Instead, I'll tell you, if you're watching this because you've felt invisible, if you've been called dramatic for describing your pain, if the people who were supposed to love you chose comfort over your survival, you are not alone, and you are not wrong for wanting more. Speak, stand, write your name in your own handwriting, take up space, and when they say you're asking for too much, look them in the eye and say, no, I'm asking for exactly what I deserve, because your life matters, and your voice? It just might be the one someone else is waiting for. I used to think pain made me smaller, like it was something I had to tuck away to make space for other people's comfort, like it was shameful to be seen as fragile or sick or inconvenient. But pain didn't shrink me. Silence did. The silence of being passed over at the dinner table while my brother's basketball games were discussed like world events. The silence in hospital waiting rooms where I'd sit alone because my parents were too busy or too embarrassed to be there. The silence of canceled prescriptions with no explanation. Of birthdays that came and went without a card. Of doctors who said maybe it's stress when I couldn't walk straight from the pain. I lived in that silence for years, and I almost disappeared inside it. Until one vial of medication, just one, didn't arrive. And everything broke. Funny how something so small can crack open a life. I used to look at that moment, the email, the cancellation, the confrontation, as the worst thing that ever happened to me. But now I see it differently. It was the moment I stopped asking for permission. The moment I stopped waiting to be chosen. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I needed to see myself. And I did. I saw myself in the mirror at the hospital, pale and exhausted but still breathing. I saw myself in Lynn's eyes when she held my hand and said, "They made their choice, now you make yours." I saw myself again, stronger, standing in court, on the clinic floor, in the classroom, holding the hand of a little girl who reminded me of everything I used to hide. Now, when people ask me what happened, how a family so put together could let one of their own fall through the cracks, I tell them this. Sometimes the mask is more important to them than the person behind it. Sometimes the illusion of perfection is worth more to people than truth or love or even blood. And when you break that illusion, they won't thank you. They'll exile you. Let them. Because there's something better waiting on the other side of exile. It's called freedom. And once you taste it, once you breathe in a life where you don't have to beg to be believed, you will never go back. If you're still watching, thank you. Thank you for staying with me, for listening, for letting this story take up space in your day. But more than that, I hope it makes you look inward, or maybe around, because someone you know is hurting, and they may not be loud about it. They might smile through dinner, show up for work, laugh at the right moments, but inside, they're drowning, and they don't want to cause waves. I used to be that person. I was the good patient, the easy daughter, the girl who didn't make things complicated, until the day I almost died of someone else's silence. So if you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You are not too much. You are not dramatic. You are not selfish for needing help. You are allowed to say, "This hurts." You are allowed to say, "I need more." You are allowed to speak even when it makes other people uncomfortable, because discomfort isn't danger. Silence is. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. Even if they call you ungrateful, even if they try to guilt you into backing down, do it anyway. Because your voice, your truth, might be the only thing keeping someone else alive. Maybe it's your child. Maybe it's your friend. Maybe it's you. I'm not special. I'm not stronger than anyone else. I just reached a point where staying quiet felt more dangerous than being honest. And when I finally broke that silence, the world didn't end. It began. So let this be your beginning too. Not just an ending to my story, but the start of yours. Say it with me. My life matters. My health matters. My story matters. And I will not be invisible again. The screen fades in. A quiet clinic hallway. Mira walks slowly, clipboard in hand, passing by rooms where patients sit, waiting, hoping, holding on. She enters one room where a young girl, no older than 10, sits on the exam table clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her eyes are tired, her skin pale. But when Mira smiles, the girl smiles back. Gently, Mira hangs an IV bag. She adjusts the dosage, checks the girl's wristband, and sits beside her. The girl whispers, "Will this help?" Mira nods. It already is. For a moment, they just sit there, hand in hand, future to future. Then Mira looks into the camera, directly, calm, strong, certain. Her voice, "I once believed I was too much, too sick, too inconvenient to be worth saving. But I was wrong. I was never the burden." The silence was, "If you're watching this and your story feels invisible, this is your sign. Speak, write, fight, or just survive. That alone is resistance. And if you're someone who can help, don't wait. Don't turn away. Because somewhere, someone's life depends on whether or not you show up." The screen fades to black. Words appear, white on black, based on real events still happening every day, but rarely seen. The Vile Trust, founded by survivors, funded by hope. Supporting patients with chronic and autoimmune illness who are medically neglected by families or systems. Visit theviletrust.org, donate, volunteer, share their stories. Because silence never saved anyone. Final image. The girl in the clinic smiles as her IV drips steadily. The rabbit in her lap wears a tiny wristband with her name. Fade out.